It's a little Irish whiskey.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us. I'm Carrie Stadheim with Tri-State Livestock News, and I'm moderating the conversation today. So I appreciate being asked to be here. I think this is just a really important day for cattle producers and retailers. We're all in this together, and I think we all share a number of common goals. I guess we'd like to do a quick overview of our intent today. Nearly every sector of the U.S. economy is under pressure right now, as we know, whether it's labor shortages, inflation, production lag, overall supply and demand challenges, and everyday cost of goods. Nearly every sector of the economy would tell you that they're financially stressed. The coronavirus pushed our economy to the brink last year. We saw that impact in our communities. Not every sector impacts every person every single day, except for one, and that would be our food supply, as we all know. Every American eats. Not every American, though, is concerned about our food security and the impact that the supply chain issues can have on consumers. Coming from South Dakota, our beef supply is at the top of our list of concerns, being our #1 industry here in South Dakota, both at the producer level and the end of the retail chain where product is sold to consumers. Our intent today is to bring these total beef supply chain issues to light, to start the conversation and get the perspective from cattle producers and grocers. We should discuss the impact both ends of the beef supply chain have on our local economy, on our state economy. There's lots of pressure on the system right now, as we know, and ultimately as South Dakotans, we should be looking for ways to start partnerships, build partnerships, continue partnerships on policy objectives that bring relief to these supply chain issues that are harming not only cattle producers, but consumers and likely everyone in between. If we all agree that our food supply is important and the food security is, then we should be able to start a discussion here in South Dakota, and we're excited to do that. If we can partner here, maybe other states and their national affiliates will follow. So we're excited to have this diverse panel here representing a multitude of sectors within the beef industry. Everybody is key to the industry. We all know that. We all need each other for this to work. We have producers here that raise cattle. We have people that feed cattle. We have grocers and restaurateurs that interact with consumers that buy the end product. So I guess right now I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have Dan Cahoy, who owns Cahoy's General Stores with locations in Bonesteel, Tyndall, Lake Andes, and Spencer, Nebraska. Thank you for being here. R.S.D. is the owner of Buche Foods with locations in Gregory, Mission, Oacoma, Pine Ridge, Sisseton, and Wagner. Kecia Beranek, did I say that?
Yeah, got it.
Yeah. Everyone mispronounces my name, so I don't want to do it. Owns the Turtle Creek Steakhouse in Miller. And Eric Iversen is an independent producer from White River, South Dakota. James Halverson, the executive director of the South Dakota Stockgrowers Association. Brett Kenzy, Region 3 director with RCAF and a backgrounder and cattle producer himself. And I guess I could introduce myself. As I said, I'm Carrie Stadheim with Tri-State Livestock News. My husband and I also ranch on the North Dakota-South Dakota state line. We are 100 miles north of Newell is the best description I can give you. So I was just telling someone else you can travel 170 miles on the highway that goes past our place without being able to access fuel in the evening if you don't catch Riva open during the daytime. So the cattle industry is important to me. I grew up on a ranch. My family has ranched for generations on both sides, and it's the life that I know and love. And so this is something crucial, I feel, to myself, to our local communities, which is what makes up the state of South Dakota. I think the general interest in having this group together today is to discuss these different perspectives of business people that work in the beef industry, have them share their experiences, to educate one another as well as consumers and the general public. We all know that's who our end user is. We're going to move to having each of our guests on this panel provide a brief, quick summary of their experience and introduce themselves. So I guess, go ahead if you would like to, Dan.
All right, my name's Dan Cahoy. Own 4 grocery stores. I'm very involved in the meat cutting at our stores, and I order all the meats, fresh meats for the grocery stores. So I feel our meat department makes our store successful and growing. So I'm glad to have Senator Rounds looking into the packers and checking to see how we can improve the supply chain better and get some more consistent pricing and make it more reliable.
Great. We're hoping to work on that as well. Kecia, go ahead, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Kecia Beranek. I'm one of the 10 owners of the Turtle Creek Steakhouse in Miller, South Dakota. So back in 2019, my husband and I rounded up 4 other couples to buy our steakhouse because all at one time, we didn't have a place to eat in Miller, no place to eat and get a beer. So the 5 of us came together, bought the steakhouse, cleaned it up, and we've gone through some challenges since 2019, but we're still all friends and we're all still married. One of our biggest challenges is keeping our costs down to our customers. Obviously, we live with these people every day. We do life with them, so we know they're going through the same struggles as us, so we want to make sure that they're paying a fair price for a really good product. So that's why I'm here today. I really appreciate this opportunity. I've never done anything like this before, so bear with me, okay? But yeah, super excited, and we care about our community, so that's why we do what we do.
Awesome. R.F.?
My name is R.F. Buche. I am a 4th generation grocer. We've been operating since 1905. Here in November, we'll turn 116 years. I'm very passionate about this business, and just as Dan said, our meat departments make our store. Buche Foods, we only focus on quality, which means we only carry certified Angus beef. Today I'm hoping to accomplish a couple things. One, shed some light on the beef packing industry, and hopefully we can figure out a path forward for some fair competition. I'd like to see our cattle producers make money and be paid fairly for the hard work that they do. And finally, I'd like to help grocery store customers understand that high beef prices actually cause the grocers to actually make less money, which has a severe impact in small town South Dakota.
Very insightful. Thank you very much. Nathan?
Hi, I'm Nathan Sanderson. I'm the Executive Director of the South Dakota Retailers Association. We've got about 4,000 members across South Dakota, and the name Retailers Association might be a little bit of a misnomer. We represent several hundred restaurants and grocery stores and small meat processors and the like, and so appreciate these folks serving on the panel here. You know, I think we've had the opportunity to talk with a lot of different businesses around South Dakota over the last few weeks, both in the lead up to this conversation and then also sort of the larger national conversation, Senator, that you've really started to push. And one of the things that I think that we've really heard from our members is these guys really, really care about their customers. I mean, this is absolutely essential to what they do. I mean, when you're in Miller or when you're in Gregory or when you're in Bonesteel, if you don't care for your customers, you don't have any further customers. And so I think when RF is talking about quality products, as Dan's talking about making sure we get quality products at a really, really reasonable price, you know, our guys know that there are people on fixed incomes. They know that food expenses are an important aspect of a family's household budget. And so they care about the friends, their neighbors, their family, and the communities that they serve in. And so I think that's a piece of the conversation that we want to make sure that is included. And thank Senator Rounds and his staff certainly for helping to organize this conversation.
Eric Iversen, grew up in Murdo, South Dakota, have a ranch in White River, South Dakota. I too am uncomfortable sitting up here. I'd much rather be home checking cows and baling hay.
You have hay?
Chasing a windrow. But I think it's important for us as ranchers to get more connected with our consuming public, because we do have a story to share with them, and I think it's important to our rural communities. I think it's important to Main Street, and if we don't share our message, well, I think we're just going to get gobbled up and swallowed by the consolidation of this industry, and we will slowly become more and more reliant on foreign countries or foreign companies, owning our food supply, and that really scares me. I guess the main reason I do this is because of my son sitting back there. I want him to be able to carry on what I've done and what my dad did before me. I don't want to hand him a prison sentence when I'm done and say, well, go work really, really hard, and I hope you make enough money to pass it on to your son. I want him to be able to make some money and be profitable, because we've seen there is profit to be made in this industry, quite a bit of it. It's just not working the way it's going. So, I can't no longer just be the grower of the trees for the cabinet makers. We need to get aligned with the next step to share our message and get a higher percentage of that consumer dollar, because I think I read somewhere that our share of the consumer dollar went from 53 cents to 14 cents in the last 30 or 40 years, and that's the wrong direction as our beef prices continue to go up and go up. So raise Angus cattle, do a little bit of farming, raise crops and kids.
Sir?
I'm James Halverson. You think you're uncomfortable? I went out and bought a new white shirt, and the only guy that didn't get the memo to not wear a tie. But no, I work for the South Dakota Stockgrowers Association full time, and on the side, my family and I also are cattle producers. We have a cow-calf herd. The Stock Growers' mission is to promote and protect the livestock industry, so I just appreciate the opportunity to be here. I appreciate the relationship that we've built with the Senator and his office and his team, and just the fact that he's out there championing our issues all the time right now. And I think that speaks volumes to what he's doing and what he wants to accomplish. And just to have this opportunity here today, what a great opportunity to talk to people on the other end of the chain. I know a lot of people in this room, but I don't know these people, and I'm looking forward to getting to know you, because communication is key. If we can all come together, if we can make those relationships happen, if we can start to have that dialogue, that's where we can start to put some pressure on those guys who are putting the pressure on us right now. And so I just am really excited to be here and get to know you folks, and see what problems you have as well. As has been stated, as cattle producers that we represent, we just want to do what you guys want to do. We want to provide the consumers what they want, and we want to be able to compete for their business. But competition is predicated on having some fair ground rules, and I think that's what we need to talk about right here. And I truly believe, and I know Eric and Brett do too, if we have a level playing field, our South Dakota producers will absolutely compete with anybody in the world for that dollar and for that awesome product that we know is great American beef.
All right, I'm Rick Kenzy. I'm from South Central South Dakota, down by Gregory, where we have a Buche grocery store right in town. My brother and I have a partnership. We have a cow-calf herd, DNR permitted feedlot. We have traditionally been feeder cattle producers, but we've recently got into finishing program cattle because it's a lot of work, it's a lot of paperwork, nobody wants to do it, so we do it. And it turns a little bit of money, usually. I guess I'm Region 3 Director of R-CALF USA, the largest producer-led group in the United States. We have members in 42 states. I've always been politically active because I just come from the perspective that I'm important to South Dakota. South Dakota is important to me. The return that comes to me is what I pay in to sustain this state. And right now we find ourselves like in that great story, the best of times and the worst of times. These are the best of times because of people like Senator Rounds and his contemporaries that I think really get it now. I mean, probably always have, but more and more producers are actually starting to get behind the efforts that a few senators are leading, and it's the worst of times because of the concentration issues, the antitrust issues. Traditionally, I've had to rethink my position. When invited to a meeting like this, I've said that we started with one track, which is competition issues, but now we've developed into another track, which I didn't even know was possible, but it's becoming possible, which is the antitrust track. And now we have a third track developing, which could be visiting with our grocers and our restaurateurs to get, you know, South Dakota beef should be Maine lobster, it should be California wine. And I'll be honest, I don't have the time to develop that, but I love being a part of that conversation because I'm already, I like to say I'm completely invested in our operation plus a substantial amount more, but there are opportunities within this state, and every time we get good beef to a willing consumer, we win. So with that, thank you.
Thanks, Brett. I guess, you know, with that, I think all of us here in this room have had our eyes on DC for months, if not years. This industry, particularly producers, but I feel like each of us sitting here is struggling and wondering if we're going to turn a profit this year. And as everybody really has said, each of these small businesses, whether they raise cattle or sell meat or sell something else to the public, is crucial to the survival of this state. The small businesses are what make up this state. So we've been watching DC, hoping for some help, knowing that we need help in some form or another, because things just are not working right now for the cattle producer, feeder, and I don't think working ideally for the retailers either, it doesn't sound like. So Senator Rounds, we appreciate a lot of the pieces of legislation that you have brought recently, particularly this spring. And as I said, we've really been watching. A lot of us have made calls to your office, other offices, asking for help. And I think sometimes there's a level of frustration, particularly again among ranchers, feeling like our voice isn't being heard. Can you help us understand what legislation you're working on and where it's going, what your challenges are in getting some legislation passed that might be able to help us?
Sure. Let me begin just by saying thanks for being here. And I want to thank Carrie because we asked her if she wouldn't mind moderating this and kind of carrying it. We're going to turn this into a conversation. Along with it, we'd ask Nathan if they see this every day. Their consumers, the folks that they do business with, they're in talking about why they're paying $19 for ribeyes. They're in wanting to know why there's this huge spread when it comes to hamburger at over $5 a pound. And the question on it is so who's making all this money, and why is it that the consumer shouldn't be able to understand why it is that the prices on this stuff are going out of sight? At the same time, back here in South Dakota, we've got producers who for years, for a generation, have said, look, we're not going to make it, and our kids aren't going to be able to stay here if we don't do something about it. Not a new problem. 100 years ago, they started putting together antitrust laws. Teddy Roosevelt, he wasn't exactly what you'd call a regulator so much as he was an open competition and a fair market guy. And they started putting together antitrust laws. Now, since that time, the four major packers at that time controlled a little over 50% of the processing market on beef. If you move it up now 100 years later, they control over 80%. Four major packers. Not the same four. They're like everybody else. There's been consolidation, changes, and so forth. But they still control over 80% of the market when it comes to processing beef. They know each other. Now, they don't have to come back in, sit down, and have emails going back and forth. All they got to do is watch three other folks to understand exactly what the market's doing. You know when you go on in and you're going to try to figure out what you're going to get for the price or for your livestock, whether you are a cow-calf guy, or whether you are a backgrounder, or whether you are a feeder, you know in advance that they're going to tell you kind of what it's going to be for a price. At the same time, the consumer on the other end, on the other side of this choke point of 4 major processors, they walk into the grocery store and the price is set. Now they look at the grocery store guy and think he's making a hell of a profit here. The guy in the grocery store is frustrated because he looks back and knows that the guy who is his consumer in many cases, the guy who's actually raising, or a family that's actually raising the livestock, isn't getting that share. And yet, at the same time, he knows that he's been given a price as to what he's got to pay for it at the level that he's then got to mark up to just to make a profit. In the middle of this whole thing, we're all pointing at the same location. And that is that we've got a choke point in the ability in our country to process beef and to have open competition. On our side of it, our producers, if you take a look at the United States today, 9 states maybe where cows outnumber people. Now, multiply that times 2 senators apiece, that's 18 senators out of 100. Now you can get every one of those senators together and you won't make 20% of the votes in the place. You got to add another 40 votes just to have a debate on an issue in the Senate. The only way you do that is not by limiting your team, but by growing your team. We got a pretty good bench out there. It's called consumers. And our focus has got to be on getting the message to the consumer about what's going on and why they pay this huge price and who's actually in the middle of it making the dollars and keeping the dollars. And the only way we do that is by sharing our story. And by having these kinds of discussions right here. Our grocery store folks see and visit with consumers every day, but they are dependent on a limited number of locations where they can actually go to get the beef that they need, or the pork that they need, or the chicken that they need. So they're a little bit careful about what they say and who they say it to. It's time that we, number one, build the team. Now we got a lot of different groups. And I'm going to say this for again. Look, I've been in this business now since 1991. I've been in the insurance business, making a living, but I've also been on the side in the legislative process since 1991, then as governor for 8 years, and now as a member of the United States Senate going on 7 years. You don't win this by having fights among yourselves. You do this by sitting down and figuring out what we can agree on, and then you move forward and you build that team. And we got a ways to go to build that team. This is what we're going to do. And if we can do it here in this state, and if we can build a coalition of folks sharing with consumers along with the producers, we're going to make an impact. But we're one of those 9 states where cows outnumber people. We've got to be able to do this and replicate it across the country. And you say, how the hell can we do that? Well, we just had a Department of Ag, or we just had a Senate Ag hearing. And by the way, if you see Justin Tupper, he runs St. Ange out there out west, you tell him thank you for what he did. Because I'll tell you what, he was a rock star. He came in and shared with them in real simple terms just exactly what it was, and kind of gave them a sense of what it was like in a sale barn. John Thune was there, and John was right down on top of it. But I think the guy that probably made our case for us was probably one of the more liberal Democrats in the United States Senate, Cory Booker, representing consumers and asking hard questions about what's going on with this thing here. And the message is there is an open appetite out there to learn the whole story and to talk about not just quality of food and food safety, but about the pricing on food as well from consumers. So what I want to do, and the reason why we want this together is how do we build this team and how do we take it nationally? How do we make this a bigger program? Because it isn't just it's not going to be one piece of legislation that makes this work. This is going to be a movement that has a whole lot of things that open us up to price transparency, to make sure that the rules that are on the books right now for antitrust are being followed, and if they're not, what we got to do to fix them. And then, how do we get more competition for beef and bring the price down in the grocery store? And there's a way to do it. I'm just gonna say, I love the idea. Look, I got beat up a little bit when I was governor because in Aberdeen, we had a beef plant, and people say, oh, what's going on and why you got a beef plant up there, and how come, you know, you're looking at all sorts of financing and everything? Because I want to be able to make another market for cattle producers in South Dakota. And it's working now. But on the other side, you got 50 Hutterite communities in the state of South Dakota that put together, because they were getting paid a commodity price for their turkeys, they built their own plant. And today, they not only produce turkeys, but they process turkeys, and they make end products for some of the major retailers in the United States. There's more than one way to skin this thing. I don't know exactly what it is, but if we get folks talking back and forth with one another, we're going to be able to come up with multiple ways to open this market up. If it was easy, it would have been done a long time ago. So I want this to be a conversation. I want this to be an idea thing, but the biggest thing that we can accomplish today is to build the team and make it bigger, not to find reasons to disagree with one another, okay? We're in this together. I want that next generation of kids to make it. What's next? Where are we going? I got to do this. I had a guy stand up at St. Ange a year ago and say he thought we could get something done. Pat Trask is here. Pat, I want to thank you for all your support and for your persistence on trying to make this a better place for the next generation. But thank you.
We're going to get this. Is there a latitude for me to speak a little bit?
Well, what I'd like to do right now, I really want to get this crew going on this thing and have this conversation right now.
Okay.
And then if we've got some time here, one way or another, we'll try to get some other comments and stuff going in here, okay? But I wanted to recognize this is something that's got to have a whole lot of folks driving, and Pat's been one of the drivers on this thing, and we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, let's do it. Let's
So,
get a roll.
Thank you, Senator, and I do actually, I think later on I want to circle back to some of what you're talking about, particularly getting the other senators and representatives involved, hopefully on a bipartisan manner.
It has to be bipartisan. In the United States Senate, it has to be bipartisan, and it's doable.
Yeah, so I'm hoping to ask you how we do that at, a little bit later, but I think we, like you said, we want to kind of move forward with this so everybody gets a chance. So first off, we're going to start with our producers. And we've obviously all heard the economic concerns the livestock industry has had for several years, specifically the processors consolidating and controlling prices. What makes now a critical time for your industry, and what do you think are some of the most immediate steps that can and should be taken to help return profit to the cattle industry in South Dakota?
I can start. I'll go back to college a little bit. And don't worry, Nathan, Carrie, I know you guys are college.
So you can't share any stories.
I won't bring that part up. One of my favorite movies is called Office Space, and there's a scene in there where he's going to some counseling. He's had a bad day, and he basically tells the counselor that every day was worse than the day before. So every day that you see him is on the worst day of his life. And I think that's kind of similar to this. Why is today critical? Every day is more critical than the day before, because people are going out of business. We're losing our industry a little bit at a time. And every single day, do you want to ask why is today more critical? Because we lost people yesterday, and the day before that, and the year before that. And so I think the reason today is the most critical, and moving forward is the most critical, is exactly that. You know, we saw in 2015 when COOL was repealed, and we can talk about COOL later, but that's when we started to see, before that it was parallel, the live cattle and the boxed beef prices. And at that point you started to see that spread, and you started to see no correlation between the live cattle market and boxed beef prices. And an article that you wrote, quoted a regional packer from Texas last year that spoke in South Dakota that said, there can be no correlation between box beef prices and live cattle. And in my world, that just doesn't make any sense if we can't correlate the raw product to the actual retail product. You know, so in 2015, the packers started dabbling in unexpected market practices and market behavior. We started to see that. We've had some of these black swan events, and every time, you know, first it was they were gaining, you know, $300 or $400 or $500 a head. Then after the fire in 2019, it was $700 a head. And they started dabbling in those practices, and they figured out that nobody's hitting the reset button on them. Nobody's watching over them. Cattle producers are going out of business and losing more and more money, and they just keep jacking their prices up for you guys and jacking our prices down. And so, you know, lately we've seen them over $1,000 a head. And so I think every day is absolutely more critical. And nobody wants the packers to go out of business. We realize they're an important part of this process. But if there's $1,000 or $1,200 to be made on every head that goes through their doors, if that was shared amongst all of us, you know, a few $100s each, I think this conversation probably wouldn't even be happening. But right now that's not happening because they're putting that squeeze in that pinch point.
I guess I would add to that, what we've seen develop is two different markets entirely. You have the cash market and you have the alternative marketing arrangement market, okay? Every year we kill 650 to, or every week we kill 650 to 680,000 finished cattle in this country. 85% of them go through 4 companies, 2 foreign owned, 2 global, the other 2 are global. That's 26 million head of cattle a year. So any local initiatives that we have are not going to fix that problem. But that's where we go back to the different tracks, the big antitrust track, the direct legislation track, and then also this track, because some people laugh about ranchers, but we are the risk takers and entrepreneurs, and I know you guys are too. Small business is a better way to put that. Not ranchers. We're all small businessmen, and we understand that it takes profit to innovate. And I guess that's why this panel excites me, because I think that there's so many opportunities for economic development. Some will have gold shovels and some will not. You know, what Senator Rounds is working on is not gold shovel, but that is economic development when we can return more of that producer dollar back to producers, rural America, South Dakota. That's the hand that feeds us all. But then also, it'll be interesting to hear from you guys about what you think, because, you know, that's so much of what I see in RCAF or in politics or in business in general. We all think we know what each other think, but we don't. So I'm excited for that. And then issues like MCOOL. You know, I did a couple charts for the panelists, and they're very simple charts. This is just the return to the ranch of the consumer retail dollar. And for every year in my life, that trajectory has been down. The other chart is almost the same thing, but it shows the value of finished cattle versus the value that your customers, the consumers, and me, I shop at grocery stores, that they pay. And up to 2014, we ran together, and then sometimes the cattleman was above what the consumer was paying because of the drop value. That's the byproduct value, which now is $10 to $12 a hundredweight. That's what a lot of the old timers say. That's what packing plants used to run on, was the drop value. That was their profit. They got to keep that because that whole animal has value. But then in 14, when a lot of things happened, droughts happened, but to me the most important thing was when MCOOL was repealed, because what Justin Tupper did in DC is he said competition, competition, competition. You can have no capitalism if you don't have competition. And we lost a crucial piece of competition in 2014 when we lost the ability to compete with imports. And so I'm sure that somebody else will expand upon that. You know, when we lost MCOOL, it gave the processors the ability to import beef, unwrap it, rewrap it, and put a product to the USA label on it.
Yeah, let me just add, that's a Department of Ag rule that's been in effect since at least 2003. that we've got legislation in to fix, but they could do it with the stroke of a pen right now. They won't do it.
And when you tell somebody that, they look at you like you're crazy, because it doesn't make any sense. And so those are the things, but you know, I really wanted this chart to show you guys who probably know. I mean, it's not us, right? It's not the cattlemen. It's that processor, that global processor that's gobbling that up and taking it away. So that's what I fight for, is to get these trends back in line, get the producer share back in line, because it's a valuable product. So that's what I've got.
Hey, let me break this up just a little bit. Don't you guys think it would be worthwhile if on your market shelf you had an item that said basically, look, here's our beef, but on these items that may have a voluntary, and it's a voluntary sticker, by the way. What the rule says is if you bring in boxed beef and it's from overseas, if you're a processor, all you got to do is repackage it. Well, when it's boxed beef, they're going to repackage it. When it's repackaged, you can put a voluntary label on it, product of the USA. So if you repackage it, so when it comes in to you folks, can you share a little bit about how that works within the grocery store?
Sure. So when it comes into us, I mean, we're seeing just exactly what the senator's saying. We're seeing a boxed beef product of the USA. We buy 90+% of our beef from AWG, Associated Wholesale Grocers, based out of Kansas City, Norfolk Division. But it all comes in just exactly like you're talking about, and then we've got to cut it up and package it out for our customers.
Okay. What about if it was pork? Let's just talk pork butt. It's smoking time of the year. Pork butt. How does that come to you?
That pork butt, sorry, go ahead.
Well, usually like from Smithfield, we get most of our meat from Smithfield for pork. It comes repackaged, retail label already on it. All we have to do is weigh it and put it out. We don't have to cut up the pork butts. Pork chops, different story. We cut those up, but some of that stuff comes retail on it. That's the product.
It's an integrated part of the process right now for the grocer, for a lot of the stuff that's out there. Ribs is probably the same way. Pre-packaged, brought them on in, ready to go. Good quality, but nonetheless, part of the process now where the grocer's getting it and setting it on the shelf, but it's pre-packed and ready to be laid out in front of the consumer. Pretty efficient.
If I could ask you guys a question. You know, I like to do a little, you know, hobby meat processing, so I'll go into our local grocery store and I'll get a case of pork bellies or this or that, and the old guy in there has a sheet of paper that says, you know, we get Monday delivery, so if we go in there, pork bellies are, you know, X number of dollars this week. It's just what it is, right? It's sort of like us when we go, you know, if Brett has a load of fat cattle, he's got one guy maybe that comes out this week and says, $1.10, take it or leave it. And is that true with you guys? You have basically a sheet, an order sheet that says, here's your price for the week, take it or leave it. And they know you're going to take it because, like you said earlier, you've got to have meat. That's what gets the people into your stores and into your restaurant.
Yeah, I actually have an experience from last week. We had everybody knows the 10-pound tubes of hamburger, 80%. We had them in our ad at $2.69 a pound. Well, the warehouse, our grocery company, got shorted from the packer that week, so we got a shipment in that Friday. They raised the price to $3.30 our cost. So we were losing over $4 a tube. But we had to sell it to the consumer or else they're going to get upset that we're raising the price and not doing the ad price. So the prices have gone up 50% in the last 2 months, and it's just our market. I mean, probably 50% of our meat that we're selling at break even or losing money on it. So.
And if I could, I'd just like to highlight in here what Dan is saying. You know, when you put an advertisement out for a consumer, these guys have to honor that. I mean, it's sort of an unwritten contract between, you know, the owners of the grocery store and the consumer, regardless of what the back end price is. And so it's not just on hamburger, it's on a lot of different products where the price that they pay is not consistent necessarily, and it fluctuates. But the price that they advertise on the back end to the consumer, they've got to honor. It's an unwritten contract, and that's sort of the challenge that we've heard from a number of folks, including these guys, is no wonder they're not making any money, because they're having to advertise for a price that's here, and they're having to pay for a price that's here, and so a lot of these, they're not making any money on the product that they're selling, even though it's more expensive to the consumer.
Kecia, where do you get your
Yeah.
beef at?
Oh, we get ours out of Reinhardt, but I was gonna add to that, Nathan, when you were talking about the farmers making the money, Brett, at Turtle Creek, we don't have any problem not raising our prices if we would know that the farmers and ranchers were getting that money, because then we know that that money is gonna come back to our community. But the problem is that money's not coming back, right? Because they're in the same crunch that we're in. So we really wouldn't have a problem if we knew you guys were getting it, but we know you're not because of the...
When we went to that rally to stop the stealing in Omaha that was held a few years ago, we really chuckled when we stopped on our way home and had a $50 steak after we were talking, to nationwide producers about the locale presence. So yeah, it's the same thing.
So following up some more on that, Brett talked competition, and that's, I think, what we're hearing from you folks. So what is your situation when you're sourcing your meat? Do you have options, more than one?
Sort of. Most independent grocers are going to pick one wholesaler, and that's going to, that'll accommodate probably about 50% of your purchases. The rest might be, Coke and Pepsi and Frito-Lay. We have one wholesaler, which is AWG. We probably buy 90% of our product there for, mostly for our cost and also for the quality. But we also can buy beef from, maybe 10% at the most that we would pick up from restaurant supply chains, stuff like that. US Foods, Reinhardt, etc.
So let me ask this then. So make the connection there between those guys that you're dealing directly with and one of the major packers out there that we all complain about.
Well, our wholesaler would be negotiating price for the box beef from those packers, and then that is taken on and then sold to us.
Well, maybe I think what Senator is getting at is you've got a cattle producer over here who's got a calf, and maybe they feed that out, or maybe they sell that calf to a cattle feeder, who then sells that calf, steer, heifer, whatever it be, at a market weight to the packer. The packer is processing that animal, and maybe they're selling it to a wholesaler, who's maybe selling it to a grocer, or maybe direct to a retailer, who then ultimately gets it to the consumer. So from the time that you guys, have your calf drop in the spring, to the time that it ends up on a dinner plate, there's probably 6 different steps in the process.
So theoretically, let's say you decided you wanted to get your beef somewhere else, would that be possible? Could you get your other products still from that company?
Yes, absolutely.
And source your meat somewhere else?
Yeah.
Okay. How about you, Kecia? Do you have more than one option for buying?
We get ours just from one option because of quality, consistency. It's always going to be the same. That's very important in the restaurant world. We want to make sure that they get the top quality and the price, but also the service that they give us. There's a few options. We'd love to source it locally. We have a couple owners that actually are cattle producers, so we'd love to do that, but it's just not feasible. We're barely making it as it is if we start doing that. But that would be, we've had requests to do that. Let's have some, hand county beef, but we can't.
So tell us why that isn't feasible for you.
It's just, we just aren't set up for it in Miller. We just don't have the options and the price, obviously. It's just not something that we can do, but we'd love to.
Well, and the 30-second answer there is obviously in a 1,400-pound steer, there's all sorts of different cuts, right? You've got steak, you've got roast, you've got hamburger, you've got ribs, you've got brisket, you've got all sorts of things. Well, those folks aren't necessarily selling the exact proportion of that in their steakhouse that a steer or a heifer at market weight produces. And so you've got to have some sort of excess way to get rid of the cuts that aren't being purchased at a steakhouse, right? And that's really the disconnect for a lot of folks between, say, a small meat processor like Angela Leiferman in the audience here and Turtle Creek Steakhouse. That's part of the disconnect and part of the reason why a lot of these folks need a packer in some way, shape, or form.
But if a bunch of producers were to get together with a bunch of South Dakota feeders and work with some South Dakota processors to work to come up with a consistent supply of what you guys can market year round, try to take the consumers hate this. They want consistency.
They want the same.
So if we can take I'm used to not making any money, so you can pay me break even for my steers, and Brett will probably take break even for his once they're fat. Get Ken or somebody at Wall Meats to do a sizable amount so we have a consistent supply of this. So when you go to your price sheets and looking for what you're going to supply to your customers, all that's already been worked out. I would think that would be a pretty easy sell then.
Except
have to
for
wait.
one part on it, which is that processor would quickly exceed the demand in South Dakota because we got a whole lot of beef out here. And if they can't sell across state lines without getting a federal license to begin with, it's one more major step.
Yep.
And then they've got to have access to a pretty in-depth marketplace that's pretty comfortable with the lines of distribution right now. And I agree with you, there are some very high-quality wholesalers out there that really do have it set up to where it's a turnkey operation. And so it's a matter of when you bought the operation, these are the folks that supply it for you, and to break that chain is a real challenge.
Right.
The issue is in the middle of it, there's still this choke point of major processors that distribute to all of the wholesalers and negotiate with the wholesalers to produce that product. But they understand because they look at each other and they don't have to communicate with each other. They can see the market in terms of what's going on in the market right now because there's basically 4 of them. And I think that's the part it's the reason why Teddy Roosevelt was concerned about antitrust way back over 100 years ago. You need the open competition and transparency. And so I'm going to come back in on this thing here. Wouldn't it be interesting to be able to know what the guy down the street's getting for formula beef? And that's part of the transparency demand that we think is missing in the industry today. So that you know what to expect, and the guy down the street isn't getting a really good deal to supply a certain percentage of all the beef coming to a particular supplier, so they don't really need everybody else's, and they can wait for that price to come back down again. Particularly if they've got an outside source from another country that's frozen, boxed, and part of their vertical supply chain to kind of feed in when they want to.
Yeah, and the irony of all of this, and I think these guys have talked about it just a little bit, as the price is going up, the consumer is able to purchase less of really good quality South Dakota beef. I mean, just give us a couple of anecdotes about what you're seeing right now related to sort of consumer behavior.
Well, I mean, most of our customers are on fixed income. So, they've only got $100 a month or $200 a month to spend. And so they come into our stores and they, geez, everybody deserves a nice fat ribeye once in a while, and they see that, and it's 16, 18 bucks a pound. They're not going to buy it, okay? So they're going to trade down to a mid-level steak, and those that were buying a mid-level steak are trading down to a lower-level steak or going to pork or chicken or smoked meats. And what happens there is that penny profit, the dollars going through the till, shrinks, and so does our margin. So we're actually making less money with these high beef prices. And when we make less money, we can't afford to sponsor ball teams. We can't afford to donate to the parish supper, help a local person with cancer, give scholarships, all the things that we do, that puts that in jeopardy.
So have you been forced into changing your offerings based on what consumers are looking for? Are you pulling things off the shelves like ribeyes that aren't selling?
Yeah, we have let's say T-bones. Normally we sell them at $7.99, $8.99 a pound. Last week they wanted them an ad for $13.99 a pound. Well, we're not going to advertise that. We're not going to sell them at that. So usually we're still going to have them on the shelf. Usually I sell a few of them, but the amount of meat that we're selling at the high prices goes way down. People are going from 10-pound tubes of hamburger down to 1 and 2 pounders. Like RF said, buying chicken or frozen meats and processed meats, lunch meats and stuff like that, just to make it work.
So do you have a thought as to where this meat is going? I mean, obviously box beef prices are through the roof and somebody's buying it. I mean, can you make a guess as to whether that must be wealthier people in other parts of the country?
Well, obviously, that's some of it, at least for our stores and our customers. It just kind of trickles down. I mean, they've only got so much money to spend, and they're certainly not going to spend it on a $16, $18 ribeye.
That's a really good point. And like in the restaurant business, we've decided not to increase our prices because we know that the people ordering the steaks are also on the other end of this financial hit. So we can't, you can't in the restaurant world anyways. If you raise your prices in a small town, they'll never come back. They'll look at your menu and be like, oh my gosh, they're getting $1 more for French fries, but so we can't, because we don't want them to pay more because they're already taking a huge hit.
It's interesting that over on the far end over there, he's way different than me. He's retailing, losing money. I'm clear over here, I'm producing it, and I'm losing money. If that's not a clear illustration of market power and what actions to limit competition and transparency can do, because that market power isn't just harming me, that market power is harming the guy at the polar opposite of the food supply chain. And I think that's the argument for food security, is once he's lost enough money retailing it, what do you have to do as a small businessman? You gotta quit.
Yeah, it's everybody in rural South Dakota especially. I mean, no offense, you two, but restaurants, bars, and steakhouses are the heart of every community. That's where people go, they gather, no offense. That's where they go, but they gather, they make memories,
After church.
After church. After church, absolutely. Sorry, Senator, after church. So if you don't have these places, if you don't have grocery stores for these rural communities, we see it happen all the time, right? They go away. They will go to the next town that has a grocery store, has a bar, so it's doing more than just hurting the farmers, ranchers, grocery stores, restaurants, it's hurting the schools, it's hurting the churches, it's hurting everybody because of this anti-competitive behavior.
Well, as I was listening to the Senate testimony the other day, the argument they said of why beef prices are so high and cattle are so cheap is oversupply. It's a bottleneck in the industry because of the pack control of what's being processed right now. If it's an oversupply issue, we wouldn't continue to import record levels of beef and cattle and put that product of the USA label on that.
Now, let me share a little bit about, because there's a little bit of a complication here that we got to recognize, okay? If you talk to one of the major packers, and I talked to them, one of them is running about 70% capacity right now. And they said the reason why they're running 70% is because they got to get their folks back to work again, and they're having a difficult time getting all their people back to work again. But they've still got a demand out there. And they're going elsewhere, picking up boxed beef that's available to them and bringing it in. And when they do that, that's a sale we don't get, but somebody else does. But the rest of the folks out there don't know the difference between what's been boxed elsewhere and brought in, because you got a product of the USA marker on it to begin with. And in the meantime, there is an issue there, because they'll say, I can only harvest, or I can only process so much. And so they don't take your product. And part of what should be harvested on time is not, and that means that there's an overglut of the fats ready to go here in the United States with a processing thing that they're still moving it back out, and you're still getting the product out there, but they're bringing it in because it's boxed as part of a vertical integrated process that they've got. And livestock they may very well own from overseas to bring in. Now, they're supplying this consumer, but they're also picking up a pretty damn good spread on what they're delivering to the consumer.
But that's a problem we can fix. If shackle space is a problem, we can fix that as long as we don't have to compete through our processing facility with stuff that's coming in from somewhere else. We do the level playing field.
Furthermore, on the shackle space, throughout the consolidation.
Let's talk here, That's another thing on this thing here. Listen, when you're in the industry, we talk backgrounders, we talk the cow-calf guy, we talk a feeder, and consumer only knows that there's somebody with cows and they have calves and they grow them and they're, if they're white, they give white milk if they're a cow, and if they're brown, they give chocolate milk, But they also know that their food comes from a grocery store. Now, those consumers understand price and they understand quality to a certain extent, but they get the fact if prices are going up or if they can't find it. Now, these guys can't be in a position where they can't get the product to begin with, or that consumer's mad. And if that price is up high, that consumer's not very happy at all either. And so there's got to be a consistency on the quality, a consistency on the price, and availability all the time. On the other side of it, we talk the markets in our own lingo about this stuff, and in the middle of it, we got to build a team of consumers who are really, you're getting hit, so's the consumer getting hit. We need them, and we've got to be able to share this story with them so that when they go back in, no matter what state they're in the United States, they're talking to a member of the Senate or a member of the House saying, my prices on this stuff is too high, and I understand that I got guys out there that make these cows and these calves, they're going broke. What's going on here, and why aren't you doing something about it? I mean, that's where we got to go with this thing. So we got to build this team across state lines, and we've got to talk in terms that a consumer would understand and get it, because they got to send that message back in to Congress.
So every morning I wake up, when I'm having my coffee, I get to, almost every morning I see that Hy-Vee commercial that comes on CBS that talks about how they're sourcing the best cattle in the upper Midwest to serve to their customers. I'm like, well, those are my cattle. But my cattle go to Iowa or Nebraska, they're finished down there, and then they're ending up at Tyson or somewhere else, and then Reinhardt or US Foods comes in there and cherry picks coolers. And then they take the cream of the crop and they offer it to you guys. Why are we doing that? Why can't we take credit, for what we're doing? And that's, I think a platform needs to be built to connect the consumer to the cattleman and share that message and start the consistent supply of what we're doing here. So Tyson and they don't take credit for it. So we're adding value to what we have right here. So I can make $1 and leverage it and go to town and spend $2. That's the greatest economic development in the world.
I'm going to pull up an end run here, okay? This was set up to have this kind of a discussion in front of a group to kind of get active going on here a little bit. Let's just do this, because I think you folks understand this, and there's going to be questions out here. With all due respect, no speeches, but if you got a specific question for somebody up here a little bit, let's try a couple of quick questions here, because we said we'd have a hard stop at 11 o'clock, and it's 10:30 now. Let's do this. Let's just open this thing up. Is that okay if we just do this thing here? But let's do this thing quick. Pat, I told you earlier, I appreciated what you did back there to try to pull this thing together. If you got a question for this group up here, I'm going to give you first shot.
Well, I wanted to give a speech, so I better just...
Questions out there? Yeah,
Yeah, my name is Kenny Fox.
Kenny?
And yes.
Hi, Kenny.
How are you?
Good.
Thank you for what you've been trying to do for us. Appreciate it very much. I have to agree with Eric on the import issue. We can just look at our sheep industry and see what's happened in that, and that's the path that we're going down in the cattle industry. We import 50% of the lamb that we eat in the United States. There's really no reason for that. If we want to make our own country profitable and take care of everyone here. So I think the fact that is the one single thing that we can do right away that would put money in the producer's pocket is limit these imports. We need some kind of quota system. Tariffs, we get into some mucky water there, but a quota will slow it down. I have a nephew that was trucking hay in Nebraska during the COVID thing, and bringing it back up to South Dakota. He met truckload after truckload of Canadian cattle coming in here when American producers could not market their cattle. Now, we as producers pay our taxes here. We should get first service and then worry about imports later. I understand there's trade agreements that we are involved in that make that somewhat difficult. When it comes to the issue of trade, we need to be more persistent in get our country of origin labeling in those agreements. And thank you.
Kenny, let me just hit one item on it real quick. I don't think we're going to be successful if we say we're going to limit imports today, but what I think we can do is to differentiate where an import, where stuff is coming in from outside. But I think the way that we got to do it, and what we've tried to share is we can legislate direction to our trade reps to build that into our trade agreements, which is the part that's been lacking in the past, because you can legislate in Congress that we're going to put it in, but that violates, if we've already made a treaty with somebody, that'll violate a treaty. That's where the WTO comes in and bangs on us and says we're going to charge you, or we're going to put a tariff on other products. And that's what got us into trouble originally with the original MCOOL process. Now, it was working while it was in place until WTO made their ruling and basically said Mexico and Canada have been harmed by it. But if you build that in like we do with other stuff, you can make it work. Okay, Pat, you got a question?
Could I ask you a question like his?
Yeah, you can ask.
Okay, this book has NAS data, verified by Economic Research Service. And the focus that we have to have, and this is not just swabbing his ego because Senator Rounds is mucho with us. He is, and he gets the picture. And so the picture is this: the damage to justice of the consumers is a holocaust, and it is completely imploding not just the meat industry and the food industry, but the globalist organizations are deceiving everyone. And the data that's available is the true data from National Ag Statistics Service and collaborated by Economic Research Service, and it runs like this. We right now, we're told that mandatory cool, which was the most unified piece of legislation to consumer demands ever in history of our nation. Senator Tim Johnson told me that it was 85 to 90% of every survey the consumers said, we want to know where our meat and food come from. It's a consumer justice issue, and Senator Rounds is on that in a huge way. We've got to hold his arm up. And here's how it goes. The WTO wrote to the U.S. Department of Agriculture and told the biggest lie that could ever affect cowboys and consumers. They said, in 2014 and 2015, when mandatory cool were fully enforced, you've damaged Canada and Mexico, who are the other two partners in this tripartite trade agreement. And that damaged their trade exports to the United States of cattle. Was it the truth? Not only was it not the truth, it was the opposite of the truth. They were the two highest years in 11 years. And that's available from any NAS office in any state or any FSA office. And it could have been gleaned by just saying, okay, have a show cause hearing, bring your information. So this is how it comes down. You've got about 342 million people in this country. They eat 90 pounds of beef a year, for average, for a long time. But we, at that time, were importing a huge amount of livestock. But the amount of cattle that were coming in from Canada and Mexico was humongously grown during those 2 years that we were enforcing mandatory cool. So when we took the legislation away because the WTO threatened, now think of the think of the macroeconomics of this. They said, we're going to fine you $1.1 billion if you don't rescind that legislation. So, okay, we'll get rid of it. The cattle market dropped immediately by more than 50%, but just take 50%. So you got 43 million head of cattle. They dropped from 1,500 to 750, whether they're a dry cow or a calf. That's a 30 billion with a B hit, because we didn't want to pay the $1.1 billion fine. What cowboy thinks like that? this is so stupid, and every economics college in the world says that a dollar made by the addition of capital and labor is times 7 in its effect in the whole economy. So take 6 years of no mandatory cool, we lost 30 billion plus per year to the producers in the infrastructure economy of our nation.
Pat, he
Yeah.
did have a question in his.
I'm getting to the question. It's a buildup. So we lost somewhere near $100 and some billion to the nation because we didn't even check the numbers to see if the WTO is run by globalist cabals of money changers. And so all we have to do is restore consumer justice. The nation is screaming to know that what I paid for is really that, because they're being lied to right now. They're totally being lied to, and we've got to get back to the fundamentals of that. And Senator Rounds is focused on that. We've got to support him in a big way. And so the question is this. Given that we can do this by animating the unity, bringing our team together, and causing a whole bunch of cowboys that are deluded by the bribed effect of certain ag organizations that are just following after the WTO and the JBS and Packer companies, all we have to do is focus on the truth. If there's any question in your mind, if me or the USDA National Ag Statistics Service numbers are maybe out there, fast, just exaggerating, we'll ask that question, but it's there, and it was there the whole time. And so we've got to empower our leaders, all of them right here, to know the truth, because right now, this is solid numbers. We have less than half of the cows that it takes to feed our own nation. Don't tell me anymore about how we need to expand exports.
Pat, you gotta get to the question.
The question is this. If we do our duty and restore mandatory cool, how many minutes would it be from the time that we announce that we're going to restore mandatory cool, change the script in the USMCA before there is an inflammation to the market discovery of our cattle and our sheep and the whole national economy, including our milk? How long would that take?
Here's what'll happen. Let me just share with you. Once we're able to negotiate the mandatory country of origin labeling, at that stage of the game, consumers will now be able to determine where their beef is coming from. The value of U.S. beef, in my humble opinion, begins to climb again. But something else happens as well. We export beef. And once we have trade agreements in place that recognize our ability to do that, it doesn't limit our ability to continue to export more beef. And so we want to be able to not only export and to have a free market internally, we want it externally as well to other countries as well. And so, look, do we want to get to mandatory country of origin labeling? The answer is yes. Is there a way to do it? The answer is yes. It requires that we put it in treaty in order to make it work. The challenge, and Pat's right when he says there was $1 billion, that was the first threat, and then it was going to be increased after that by another $1 billion in terms of what they were going to assess us. But the assessment wasn't going to be a fine. The assessment was going to be a tariff on other commodities. So if you're one of the producers of other commodities, you're in knocking on your legislator's door, on your congressperson's door saying, wait a minute, I didn't have anything to do with this, but WTO is going to assess a tariff on my commodity. That's where the hang-up on it becomes, not so much that the federal government would pay a penalty, but other producers of other products would pay a penalty when they go to export their products. That was the reason why the WTO movement was so devastating in this thing. But I'm just going to say this again, I appreciate Pat's support, I appreciate his comments, I don't disagree, with the analysis that says that this is a critical thing and it will help to rebuild our economy. But I am going to get some other folks a chance, Pat, here to actually ask questions if they want to ask questions.
I have one more question.
Well, let me just run this by and give some other folks the opportunity here. Yeah.
You bet. Any state policy that can help out in this area, maybe for Nathan or James or you senators who've had a lot of, experience and wins in that area?
Let's hit it. What do you think?
Tons of policy. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, unprecedented, all of the livestock groups within the state got together. RCAF, Stockgrowers, Cattlemen, Bureau, Union, I think I'm missing one, LMA. And we talked about that. We said, we disagree on a few things. Let's leave them at the door. Let's get together and actually talk about things similar to what we're doing today. And one of the biggest things that came out of there is that transparency piece. And the senator alluded to that earlier. If we've got 70% or more of the cattle in this country being sold captive supply and those backdoor sweetheart deals, we never know what those are. That's not good. I heard this just the other day that those backdoor sweetheart deals is the tool that big corporations have used for hundreds of years to eliminate competition in the little guys. So if we can just get that one thing out there, get some actual transparency, get a market library going on the
But that transparency has got to be done at the national level.
Absolutely.
It's been tried at the state level and it was unconstitutional, it was declared unconstitutional. You can't do it at the state level, you got to do it at the national level.
Right.
Yep.
Senator,
Gotta do it at the
what do you think of complete transparency?
Define it.
Complete. When I go to Fort Pierre and buy light calves, everybody knows how many I bought, what sex they were, what they weighed, and what I paid for them. I take them home, I grow them up, I bring them back in the fall. Everybody knows how many I brought, the sex, the weight, and the price. That's total transparency that most of us in the cash market operate in, by the way. Commentators all over this country make their living reporting on cash trade.
Right now, it's about 17% of the market is price transparency. In other words, that's how much of the stuff is actually transparent today. I'm on a bill with Chuck Grassley, and by the way, Chuck Grassley is a champion on this stuff. When Chuck Grassley speaks, he's on the Judiciary Committee and so forth. When Chuck Grassley speaks on this stuff, people listen. Chuck wants, and I'm with him on one that says 50% of whatever a processor does when they buy it, they got to buy it. 50% of what they buy has got to be on the open market. And they got to move it every 2 weeks. We call it 50-14. Okay, right now that one is one of his bills. Now there's another bill out there that says, look, we don't know if they can make that work or not, but if we could get 30% and 14 or whatever the number is, even that would make a major change in this entire process to do it. So I don't know if we'd ever get to 100%, but I think if we continue to push them to say, if you're going to bring it in, the stuff that you do has got to be price transparent, open market, cash price. Well, I'm on the bill with him at 50%.
Yep. Transparency though.
Yeah, if we could get that, you'd make a major change in the market today. A major change in the market today. Yes, sir.
Love to add to that. We trade fat cattle on a negotiated basis. Creating a rule to do that does not change how many buyers there are. They're still going to go back, in my opinion, to the same people that they had the deals with and buy those cattle first. Comments to that?
Justin Tupper said this to me the other night. He said, the most important person in the entire ring is the second bidder.
Yep.
There's a lot of truth to that.
Also, to add to that, a free market, if there's this much profit at the processing level, how come the free market's not filling that void? Is there barriers to it? Is it labor shortages? Is it capital? I don't think it's capital. We see big projects happen all the time.
I would add inspections, and the senator has introduced the bill several times for state inspections to be able to go federal, have the same rights and privileges as federal. I would gather that's a barrier to that entry. I mean, if we know we can build a certain size packing plant, then we're going to come get attacked from either the inspections or the big processors. It really inhibits that capital influx in the processing sector.
When you asked the question about what can the state do, I think a major step forward would be provide incentives and opportunities for more small processors to get into this thing. And I like the idea that the state has done now with regard to joining a compact, a cooperative to sell across state lines. That's very healthy. We need more states doing that. But to provide an incentive to be able to process meats means value added in our state and allow them to be able to move across state lines and to market. They're not going to make, it's not going to make huge impact compared to the major guys, but it's one more. And if we can get enough of those, you do make a difference.
Senator, stop looking at my sheet, because that was what I wrote down and answer your question well.
Okay.
That's exactly right. Make it easier for small meat processors to operate. We've got, the Secretary of Agriculture in here. We've got Dr. Rodikoven in here, part of the conversation, and they've been working on that for quite a long time, and certainly appreciate that program that was that Governor Noem helped put together, the $5 million assistance for small meat processors. More of that kind of thing certainly is going to create more market opportunities for these guys over here who are raising cattle, and make it easier for these guys to source their product in a consistent, high quality manner.
That's the table we're missing up here maybe, is we need to hear from our processors. We've got small processors and we've got a great big processor and nothing in between. We've got a whole bunch of cattle and retailers that are saying, hey, we can sell this stuff, but our only source of it right now is Reinhardt or US Foods or whoever it is. We need to talk to our local processors to see, can they fill that? Is it 5 to 15 a week, or is it 150 a week? How many cattle do we have to kill in South Dakota, and where are we going to do this so we can supply what we're raising and feeding in South Dakota to the people that are asking for it?
There's a gentleman right here that has his hand up too.
Yeah, I'm Baxter Anderson. We farm and ranch and have a feedlot, and then I own the Buche and Philip Livestock sale barns. I'm glad I get to ask you this question. I'm glad you brought it up. But we're all talking about market transparency and all these backdoor deals and all this that happens, and it exists. I mean, we handle hundreds of thousands of cattle. I understand backdoor deals and I understand negotiations. But this 50-14, I think it sounds really good. But the part that I hang up on it is, and maybe I'll stop myself there and say, we deal with the PNS all the time, the USDA, the state. They're on us all the time. But I deal with the packers a lot too, and I see what they do, and I want to know who's going to regulate 50-14. Who's going to be the police force on that?
Let me share with you. I think the intent was the current regulators for the packers would probably be challenged with it. But nonetheless, the first step on it is you write the legislation and then you lay out the guidelines for creating the regulation. That's the way Washington works on it. The challenge we've got right now, and it's the reason why beginning last year, we started out with a letter that 4 of us got on asking these folks to actually investigate whether or not we had antitrust activity going on among the major packers. We got 4 folks to sign out of the first letter. 18 days later, we had 18 more people that signed on that first set of letters asking again, seriously, to get on. Now that was a previous administration, but we got some action on it. Anecdotally, we understand that there's an investigation that was started because we had some folks come back to some of our members of the Senate and tell them that they'd been contacted on it. Now, since that time, there have been 2 more letters that have gone out asking the new administration and the new Attorney General to actually investigate the packers for antitrust activities. And furthermore, if there do not have evidences of antitrust violations, to work with us on amending the laws, to modernize the laws, to actually make them enforceable. Since that time, the second time around now, a lot of the cattle producers that are in here belong to associations that have supported the letter that we put together and got 28 members of Congress now to sign on with us, laying out the problem of the disparity between what the consumer is paying and what the cattle a producer is getting paid, and where that disparity is being held at. to point out the fact that there is a problem within the free market system today. The reason why I go through that whole program is we may very well have a problem with the system that we have in place for regulating any part of the major packers today in the Department of Ag or through the Department of Justice, which is the reason, and this is we just added additional legislation this last week on a bipartisan basis, asking for a separate specific office with the ability to investigate whether or not those antitrust rules and so forth are being violated. Bipartisan legislation, and the same thing is going on in the House of Representatives, because they're seeing what's happening to consumers and they're seeing what's happening to producers, and they know there's a problem in there. So to answer your question, if we're successful in our legislation, it may very well be that new office that would be challenged with actually doing the investigation. Not just a single person, but an office in the Department of Ag, but with affiliation with the Department of Justice. We don't have that connection today.
So
Your question is a very valid question.
either way, it would be a government entity office.
Yep.
Okay, can I ask one more question?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm getting a lot of signals here. I think we need to wrap it up.
We can
we take?
we can talk on. I'll visit with you afterwards, but I
Sorry.
appreciate your in-depth question on it, though.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I just think all of this conversation is obviously very, very important to everybody here. I wanted actually to circle back around with you guys for one more question. When the COVID pandemic kind of first started affecting us last spring, and we were seeing, of course, in news reports that beef was not available on a lot of grocery store shelves. I don't know if you guys dealt with that or not. I, as a writer, was hearing from a lot of ranchers saying, can you please write a story so people know that we are still producing beef, that we're still doing everything we can. It's not our fault there isn't beef in the grocery store. We want to help our consumers. We want to make sure that they can get what they want. I guess my question to you guys is, do you feel like consumers are still concerned about food security? Were they concerned about food security, or has their concern gone more to price now? And also, I'm just going to throw this in there too, since I know we're running really short of time. What do you think your consumers feel about, are they interested in country of origin labeling? Are they concerned about where their beef is coming from?
I absolutely think that they're interested in knowing where their beef comes from. I think they're interested. Cool. During the pandemic, we definitely had some supply issues, some shortages. Those have kind of ironed out by now, but just the same thing. The prices were up and down, and consumers not knowing where to go, and quite frankly, we didn't know where to go. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, for my stores, we're really about selling local products and stuff, and I would love to sell and say this is from South Dakota or Nebraska or the local beef. And I know our customers will spend more money to buy local stuff. I mean, they would pay $1 more a steak to know where exactly it's coming from. During COVID, we ran into supply issues. People were stocking up on meat and getting nervous that it's going to run out and stuff, and trying to educate the consumer that it's not going to run out. There's plenty of beef around. But now it's more, I think the pricing, we have the meat, but the pricing is just way up there that they can't afford it. So they're buying the more unhealthier products, and we need to fix that somehow.
Yeah, mine's a little different. So I know they want to know where their beef comes from, absolutely. And when they come in, they want to know, and like, it comes from Reinhardt. Like, they cherry pick it. It's just the way it works. But they want a fair price as well. I mean, they think when they see a price tag on the menu or the grocery store, they think that these guys are making a lot of money, and that's just not the case. So yeah, I think they want a good quality product. They want to know where it comes from, but they want a fair price as well.
So what can we do for you to make your job easier? It's consistency. It's a consistent supply.
It's education, but kind of got to dumb it down a little bit, guys. Like, you just heard us. You all use words that I am like, what are they talking about?
What is today's Generation Z consumer really asking for? I mean, they're way more in tune than my generation. You know, after I switched from the Hy-Vee commercial and on my way to Fox News, you know, I hit CBS and I got to hear, you know, Vladimir Dutier talking about the belching and farting cow ruining the environment. You know, is today's consumer really going to consider other plant-based protein sources? And is that going to be what you guys are selling in your grocery stores if they get their way? Is it education that we need to? Is it the one-on-one with the Minneapolis soccer moms that say, you know, you spend a lot of money on Patagonia and Under Armour and everything else. Image is really important to the American consumer. Why wouldn't what we're putting in their mouth be just as important?
I would
give them a reason to buy the best.
Yeah, they're advertising that. I mean, just like, let's look at milk. The soy milk, the almond milk, that's increasing. I mean, every year, and the milk is going down. I mean, could be the same with the meat. We got to educate the consumer that beef is where it's at, but it's
and we're not destroying the environment and being cruel. Whatever it is they're thinking. Yeah, I think that's the platform maybe we're missing, is that network to reach out to the consumers and find out what they really want. But we're probably not that far off in what we're doing.
But to Kecia's point, you know, in order to get this settled at a local level, you know, I had a lot of producers reaching out to me during the pandemic. Can I sell you something? Or trying to set up for the future, how can we get this figured out? But we just aren't talking the same language. I mean, I have no idea how many head of cattle we would sell in a year. You know, I know how many pounds of burger I sell. I know how many pounds of stew meat I sell and how many minute steaks and T-bones, but I have no idea how that equates on your side.
But that can be reconciled, right?
I think so.
Absolutely, and I think more conversations like this is great, what South Dakota Retailers did, bringing in such different perspectives and then having somebody sit down with us and explain, but just working together, I think more of this would help a lot.
Is there a site out there through the Retail Association that says, you know, this is how many ribeyes South Dakota grocers and restaurants go through in a week? This is how many T-bones. Okay, so we've got 20% of the carcass sold. Now we got to figure out what we're going to do with the chucks and the rounds, and do we work with our hotels, prisons, school systems to utilize 100% of the carcass? And once we know that and that's all collected, then you come to us and say, okay, you get some feeders and cowboys lined up and let's get a consistent supply of this 365 days a year. And now let's go find out where we're going to process these things. Are we going to toll process them at some big packing plant, or are we going to help all of our local processors go from 5 to 10 head a week to 50 to 100 head a week or a month, and then solve all those challenges of workforce and the things that go along with a local processing facility in a small community?
And I think you just articulated why what you're talking about hasn't happened yet. There are a lot of different dials that need to be adjusted, and there's no one single entity who can sort of see the big picture.
But I think when all that has been done, I think we're going to see a big gaping hole there that says, you know what, we need 4 or 5 processing facilities in South Dakota that can do 30, 40 head a week, 50 head a week, whatever it is. Is that better than one great big one? Absolutely. For national security it is. For flow, for diversity, for our rural access. Yeah, and our local communities.
And somebody actually thought about that 20 years ago. 20 years ago, somebody in this room thought about that very thing.
So I guess to kind of pull everything together, as a rancher myself, as also working in the livestock industry, in the newspaper industry, raising cattle, there's few things I enjoy more than serving good meat to my family, and I think I'm hearing the same thing from you all as far as your customers go. On behalf of the cattle industry, thank you for selling meat, thank you for representing meat so well and being proud to sell meat and being interested in South Dakota meat. That is just, I think, a huge step forward, and just really music to our ears to hear how interested you are in that. And thank you to everyone for being here and hearing the concerns of the industry today. I think we're gonna wrap things up with some closing comments. I don't know, we'll just go back maybe the same direction as we opened, if you all wanna just share your closing thoughts.
Yeah, I guess we're just we want to be selling a quality product at the best price we can for our consumer. I think there's been some, at the state level, we sell a lot like locker, sticks and jerky. We use like Flat Locker, and he wants to sell at our store in Nebraska, but he can't right now because of the cross state line. So just small things like that will gradually increase the local production going forward. So people like local stuff in this area, so I want to keep doing that.
Yeah, so, I mean, we're doing the best we can do, and if we just keep getting that message out that we want farmers and ranchers to make money so that our communities make money, because we want to make sure we have these communities for our kids and our grandkids to come back to and have the same quality of life that we have. It's part of our culture, it's part of who we are, and we need something to be done with this anti-competitive meat packing. It's just devastating to South Dakota right now, especially to our rural communities, for sure. And I'm so excited to be here. This was great. Thank you for the opportunity, South Dakota Retailers.
Bowie Foods, we certainly pride ourselves in quality meat, which is why we offer certified Angus beef. But more importantly, we pride ourselves in being a big part of the community. So we need our farmers and ranchers and producers to make money so they can spend money in our stores. But I'd like to see everybody stay diligent in how we can get the farmers and ranchers, producers making more money and keeping our small towns thriving, because that's what I'm passionate about.
Yeah, I think competition is a wonderful thing, and maybe that's what we're lacking right now, all the way from the cow calf to the feedlot, all the way up to the retailers. Is diversity is great. We don't want to have all our eggs in one basket, because it creates a toilet paper shortage, when you have a pandemic. Yeah. So I think one key thing we need to walk away with is, what is our consumer asking for? We live in a world now where social media, we know everything, and we want to know everything. So we need to share our message. I feel I would be happy to have any consumer come to my ranch and see what I do and how I care for my animals. I'm passionate about it. That's why I do it. I don't do it for the money. I do it because I get to raise my kids as I'm out working and watch my kids gain some responsibility and trust in themselves. And I think that's wonderful. So I think we don't want to just put our heads down and just continue to work. That's why I'm here. I love to work. That's what I wish I could just do. But we need to do this. We need to find out what our consumers are asking for and work towards that.
I think to add to that, moving forward, there's going to be a social aspect that the younger generation wants with whatever they buy. And that's a good thing for us. We have a great story to tell. We really do. And we so often, like you said, we tell it to ourselves all the time when we sit here and talk all these, but we need you guys, and I'm so happy to get together with you, to get to know you. Maybe Mr. Sanderson and I need to get together and come up with some legislative issues at the state and level and to take to the DC delegation. But there's going to be a social aspect, especially with the food that people buy moving ahead. And I think that's a battle that we can win. We just got to figure out how to do it at an efficient level.
From a cattle producer side, RCAF and I, MCOOL is my issue. It's right. It's true. It's competitive. But things like MCOOL 5014, antitrust issues to go at this consolidated processing, this consolidated global processing group that's looking out the front door of the packing plant at the cattleman, telling him what his cattle are worth without proper value discovery. Also wield that same power out the back door, loading the trucks coming to grocery stores and restaurants across this nation. Now, Senator Rounds had a great letter with the Rounds-Smith letter that he sent to the Attorney General, because bipartisan, bicameral, because we had an independent on there, right? Because it didn't just call on somebody else to do something. It called for cooperation between the Attorney General, Congress, and the DOJ to get to the bottom of what's really going on with this. And then it went to list several specific things, which is something no other letter had done. I believe that that letter and the amount of calls from real producers and consumers are what educated, so well educated, the Senate Ag Committee for the hearing that we had last week. So it's no one big step, it's a series of small steps that add to it. But I want to thank the senator for that, I want to thank these guys for this, and I think the realization that I take is just the fact that we're both looking down the same barrel of guns pointing in opposing directions, and competition not harming anyone, but just mandating competition and transparency is the answer for that. But we have to get moving. We've been fighting this battle too long. It has to happen soon. So, thank you.
Thank you. Brett?
Well, from my perspective, thanks to the 50 or so people that we've got in the audience here on a Friday morning, talk for a couple hours about this really important issue. You know, I think we've heard today that market stability, you know, that regular supply chain at a reasonable cost, that benefits everybody, and we're not necessarily seeing that right now. And so, you know, these guys that I love working with, they own and operate these stores and restaurants and grocery stores and meat processors in South Dakota. These guys love their communities, they love their customers, they want to give them a good product at a reasonable price. And this is the kind of thing that it impacts us all, and we're happy to be part of the conversation and working with you all. And certainly thanks to Senator Rounds for your really diligent interest in this important issue. Thank you.
Let me just say thanks to Carrie for coordinating and helping to make this whole thing come together. We appreciate what you're doing here. Nathan, thanks for helping to put together the team here. It is greatly appreciated. Look, I would love to see more local processors, number one. And I think that's something that is very doable. We need to provide the incentives and make it as easy in terms of a regulatory process for small processors to compete and to stay in business and to get employees here. Second piece on it is we're not going to be living in a world during our lifetime in which you don't have major processors. And if you're doing 650,000 head plus on a regular basis, you need major packers to be able to do that. But they also have to have, first of all, laws that are very clear about what the rules of the road are in terms of competition. And then you've got to have a good series of enforcement activities to make sure that the rules are followed to allow for a fair playing field for everybody. That's not happening today. So I think what this comes back to is consumers expect to have a consistent flow. They expect to have a consistent product. They expect to have a high quality product at an affordable price, a fair price. Producers want a fair market where they can compete, but to where they're not being manipulated by a vertically integrated system that's just simply not a fair competitive price, to where everybody knows what the market really is. For me, what I want is to be able to step by step work our way through what Congress has to do in order to get back to a good market that treats people fairly. And I think Teddy Roosevelt was right when he said you got to have the rules of the road laid out. I think he was right when he tried to do anti-competitive legislation back in the 1920s. And I think it's time that we either, number one, get to the bottom of whether or not the folks that are out there right now have figured out ways to manipulate the market, and if they are, we got to fix it. And if we can't, it means we got to rewrite the legislation that's out there. And finally, we've got to be able to provide the same incentives for food producers to recognize our need for food security, food quality, and availability to a consumer, to where the regulatory activities in Washington promote that. And it's not going to be easy, it's not going to get done overnight, but we're in it for the long haul. And one step at a time. I would also say this, if we can take one piece of all these things that we've talked about, the way Congress works is you take a piece, and then you start adding to it. And when you're all done, you can get a whole lot more done than what you thought you could have when you started. Consumers have got to be with us. We've got to be with them. What we've done here today in South Dakota could be duplicated in other states where more and more consumers can see what's impacting the price that they pay and the quality of the food they've got. Let's see if we can't be a promoter of that and get those other 49 or 41 states that don't have as many cows as we do to recognize that they're in this with us, and that if they really want that food safety and food quality, they got to step up to the plate as well. Thank you. And thank you all here for being here and participating.